Welcome, my friends, to the Building Efficiency Resources podcast, the BERcast. And I am joined once again by my colleague, Natasha Brooks with BER Ltd. Natasha, how's it going today?
Pretty good. It's kind of hot here, though, Chris. It's 85 without the Humidex, and it's 98 with the Humidex here in Halifax, Nova Scotia today. So
Brutal.
I am feeling it. It is hot. Thank goodness I have my ductless heat pump going with my AC, because else it would be unbearable where I am today. But it's beautiful, though. Beautiful and sunny, but yeah, pretty good. Pretty good week. How's it going for you?
I'm good. Detroit's quite nice. It's a little bit hot, but I got my ceiling fan running and it's keeping me nice and comfortable in this room. So today's episode is very exciting. We're talking about getting electrification right. And I've been plotting this episode for many months now to talk with my good buddy, John Semmelhack, who runs an HVAC consulting and energy consulting business in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I actually have a new friend here within the Metro Detroit area, Brynn Cooksey, who runs Air Doctors, a local HVAC company that also focuses on building performance retrofits. So we're going to have them on in segment 2. Kicking off with segment 1, couple quickie news updates around the industry. So first and foremost, we have an update from ResNet. The ResNet Standard 301 is looking to be updated here soon to the 301-22 standard from 301-2019. Okay, well, we got to stop naming these with year conventions, apparently, because the last I checked, it's the middle of 2024. So we just had REM rate 2023 come out about a month ago, and now we got a new ResNet standard, which by the time it goes into effect will likely be 2025. Natasha, I am the ResNet board of directors, recommended a couple years back. Why are we killing ourselves with these 3-year cycles for developing standards? Did you know that ANSI only requires standards to be updated on a 5-year schedule?
Yeah.
Why aren't we just updating? If we weren't from 2019 to 2022 and it's already 2024, it's 5 years. Why don't we just make it a 5-year development cycle, and then we don't have to kill ourselves? Because, Natasha, in your work as a QAD, do you feel like raters are able to really keep up with the rate of changes? Like, what does this really mean to the average rater?
We have to digest it as their QAD, and then they're coming at us with lots of questions, and depending on when they are conducting a rating and when they started a rating versus like when there's just so many factors that go into it, and which standard they fall under based on the building that they're rating. So it's not just that they have to understand the most recent standard, they have to understand the previous one as well, and there's so much overlap based on how long it's taking them to do a rating on a building. So yeah, it's confusing. It takes time for people to wrap their head around this stuff. I understand why they like to update standards frequently to make sure that they're not missing things, especially in our kind of fast-paced world that we're in now, with a lot of new technologies and new changes coming down the pipe. But it gets overwhelming. It's overwhelming for the industry as a whole, trying to make sense of it all and make sure that they're adhering to the correct standard at the right time based on the project they're working on.
Yeah, I got to be honest, I find it very challenging to keep up with. And I run one of the more in the know BERS rating providers here in the whole country. And I find it challenging. I'm on the darn ResNet board, and I find it challenging. I am hoping here that we go back to revisit the possibility of more streamlined changes that happen on a more lengthy schedule, because I think there's more of an opportunity do some research, find out what makes sense, vet the standard, public comment, set a date, ideally at least a year before implementation, and train people on really what the big change is going to be. Because the other consequence has been sometimes these changes, especially to the 301 standard, have come with changes to how the index is calculated.
Mm.
And oftentimes, like the HERS index has gone up with no change. Like the rater models the home the exact same way, but just because the standard changes, now the HERS index goes from a 55 to a 60, and then, that really catches builders by surprise and it makes the rater look bad. So I think especially if we're going to have things like that, we got to give people a little bit more breathing room and adjustment period. Let's hope that this version of the standard doesn't have quite that many surprises. So that's my hope.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see a similar thing here, although NRCan do a pretty good job at releasing information about changes that is coming and providing leeway for raters here in Canada to really kind of navigate it, get comfortable with it before they mandate that it's implemented, and give room for like feedback during that time as well. So if there are any major bugs that need to be fixed, they can fix them ahead of mandated implementation. So there's a couple different ways, but yeah, we still get the same issues here in Canada as you get in the US, and being cross border and doing QA cross border. I've seen it. The issues are there everywhere. So
Yeah, well, to a certain extent, it's sort of just the nature of bureaucratic society. There's going to be changes, laws change, tax code changes, etc. And to a certain extent, you can only prepare so much. Anyways, this is open for public comment. All it is basically saying, public comment on making the change to the 301 2022 standard. So it's not like you're commenting on the actual standard itself. It's just sort of whether and how to adopt it. So make your voice heard if you're passionate about that. But if you're not, that's okay too, because frankly speaking, we all have plenty of other work to do, especially in the realm of getting into zero emissions buildings. The DOE came out with a consensus definition of a zero emissions building, which is great. I didn't realize that we didn't already know what it was, but okay, it's basically an energy efficient building that is free from on-site emissions because its emissions are basically being covered by clean energy, by on-site renewable power. Didn't know that we needed to define it, but it's good to have this definition here. Does Canada, does NRCan have a clear definition on this kind of a thing, on zero
no, and
emissions?
it's interesting that you brought this up. I was at a meeting a few weeks ago here, and we're trying to um like move towards net zero, and one of the common themes in the building between like the developers and the other people that were in the room was we need to define what net zero is. So I think the fact that DOE has taken the lead on this and produced a national definition of what zero emission buildings mean for them is a step in the right direction, because a lot of developers, at least here in Canada, are kind of feeling a little bit confused between there's so many definitions, net zero, net carbon, like zero, like it's confusing and people don't know what what they're reaching for. And so yeah, I got to commend the DOE here on putting this out and creating like this national definition, because it's something that we're definitely kind of still confused about here in Canada, and we're looking for something like this. So um yeah, maybe I'll circulate it out to that group and see if it yields any weight um within that group as well.
Well, speaking as
Yeah.
an American citizen to a Canadian citizen, y'all are free to take this if it works. To me, it seems like a lot of work went into something that is ostensibly relatively straightforward. But, it does get into some important guidance. What happens if we're talking about electrical vehicles? Does that count? Well,
Mm,
no. According to this, that does not count. So, you'd be able to segment that out. Um, What about carbon offsets? Can I just buy some carbon credits? No, no, you cannot. So that may differ compared to something else. What does energy efficient mean? Well, it means that when using Energy Star's portfolio manager software, that a building has a score of 75 or higher. For those who don't know, who don't work in the commercial world really, the way that the Energy Star portfolio manager score works is that the higher, it's like the old HERS score. It used to be that 100 was the best you could have on the HERS, and zero was, well, I don't know what zero was. I mean, living outdoors, I guess, but lighting a canister of gas on fire. I'm not really sure how you get to zero on the score, but yeah, so 75 is like you're in the 75th percentile. You're doing better than 75% of the other buildings of your typography around you. So the portfolio manager score, you can actually use it for residential. It's not the same thing as the Energy Star certified homes program, but you could go and score your home in Portfolio Manager. You could score your multifamily building in Portfolio Manager. You could score your gas station in Portfolio Manager. Actually, I'm not sure about that. That seems kind of goofy, but maybe you probably can. Your Jimmy John's, your McDonald's, whatever it is, any type of building, just about hospitals, schools, they can get comparative scores in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And if you do and you get a 75, then you're considered to be energy efficient. If you're not eligible for Energy Star, then you can get a whole building site EUI that's 35% better than the median EUI of that category. Sounds like you got to do a little bit more research. You could use ASHRAE Standard 100. There's a few different ways to get there. Long story short, once you do that, then your direct emissions need to be zero, more or less, because you're being powered by on-site renewable energy. So there in Canada, I think you all use the Energy Star Portfolio Manager for some buildings. Is that correct?
Yeah, mainly for commercial application, but it's been a really useful benchmarking tool for the most part for a lot of commercial buildings here in Canada. The Energy Star program for homes is different here. It's implemented and it's adjusted from the Energy Star program in the US for homes, but Energy Star portfolio managers used mainly for benchmarking of projects here. Yeah.
Okay. Right on. They throw us a bone here in the residential new construction field. You could meet the Energy Star residential new construction program or zero energy ready homes, and that would qualify you as being energy efficient as well. So it'll be interesting. The DOE, the press came out basically saying that a bunch of other sort of people, green building programs, decided that they thought it was a good idea as well. And so, more people have signed on to this basically for consensus, because I think that's important, for every green building program to have its own definition out there. I think that now what are we doing? We're competing on a race to the bottom of who has the easiest path to zero. I mean, come on now. So I like this. I like the fact that it seems like people are rallying around it, and yeah, if we can just have one consensus, at least we know what our target is. So
Yeah.
and in order to get to zero emissions, yeah, you have to have an energy efficient building. You probably should have an all electric building too. Don't necessarily have to. Theoretically, you could have sort of make up for your gas consumption with sort of equivalent kilowatt hour production. But realistically, if we really want to go to zero for most buildings are going to be trying to do that through being all electric buildings, and that's what we're going to be talking about in segment 2. So we're going to go ahead and roll into segment 2, how to get electrification right. So we are in segment 2 of the BERcast, and this is actually a very special episode for me. It's been brewing for the last several months. I wanted to, we brought into the conversation on so many episodes about this whole opportunity that we have with electrification and the need for it, but also some of the anxieties that I have about the potential that we could maybe not quite get it right at such a crucial time. There's so important for us to execute it at a high level because we have such a huge opportunity and such a huge need, and so this episode has been coming together for several months. It's about how to get electrification right with people who are actually practitioners, boots on the ground, working day in, day out to get it right. They've invested their careers in making sure that we do it the right way. I have very esteemed colleagues, John Semmelhack, who runs now an HVAC business as well as an energy performance consulting business based in Charlottesville, Virginia. And then I also have Brynn Cooksey, who Brynn and I, we actually just became good buddies here in the last couple of weeks. I saw a lot of his commentary, on LinkedIn, and it turns out he's running an HVAC business based in my hometown of Southfield, Michigan, where I grew up, right outside of Detroit. And so Brynn runs a business that's also focused on HVAC, but also has incorporated home performance into the business because you kind of realize that you can't just exchange box for box and expect that people are going to be comfortable and have lower bills. You got to go even further with it. So, and then, of course, we have Natasha rolling back here on the BERcast from good old Halifax, Nova Scotia, talking about her experience with kind of the move towards electrification there in that market. We've got a market there in Nova Scotia that a couple of things are happening. Fuel oil is the historic major fuel that's used there, along with electric resistance heating. We all know that's really costly, and then also people need AC now because things are getting warmer even in Nova Scotia. So setting the stage here, John, I reached out to you about 6 months for this and said, I want to bring on a true believer, someone who actually is all in on this topic of electrification.
Yeah, so this is
there you go.
Much of a true believer I am. It doesn't come across on the audio, but I have this T-shirt with a lightning bolt power symbol. It says "Electrify Everything" here, Chris. So yes, I bought the T-shirt. I made the T-shirt.
And if he painted his face and spiked his hair a little bit more, he might look a little bit like David Bowie back in the day. Yeah. So, I mean, John, you and I have been colleagues now for close to a decade. I took John's passive house rater training probably, I don't know, back in 2014 or 15, something like that. And John was the original passive house QAD. He was the original QA manager for the Passive House Institute US, and they're kind of designed the beginning of the Passive House Rater program. And me, running BER and being the QA manager for BER, I realized that, more and more projects were coming to us, that were trying to explore Passive House, and I needed to know a little bit about this because I want our raters to think that we're the experts. So I attended the class and, awesome class with John, learned a lot about kind of the rudiments of Passive House. And lo and behold, 6 months later, John came knocking along with the executive director of FIAS, Katrine Klingenberg, saying that, John really needed to focus on his core business. And, would I be willing to take over that role as the FIAS QA manager? Thanks, John. That means a lot to me. You barely even knew me. But I appreciate you thinking that highly of me and giving me that opportunity because I filled that role for probably another 5 years or so before I, in fact, got too busy. And then I passed off the baton to Tony Lasanti. Along the way, I helped to sort of reform the program, especially when it came to multifamily and non-residential buildings. I helped to create the FIAS Verifier program. And so, John, because of you, Natasha is here because Natasha took my FIAS Verifier training.
Oh, that's
and
terrific.
She was like, hey, if you ever want to expand your business, up north, let me know. And I was like, hell yeah, I'm right across the border from Canada. I would love to expand there, and that's how Natasha is here. So
And
John.
Fun fact, Chris, you may not know, but I was the first female verifier in Canada. So
nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Thank you.
We have a lot to thank you for, I guess.
Yeah. And so John, when I kind of met up with you, and you were doing this subcontracted role, with Fias, but really you're primarily operating as a HERS rater. You had a consulting business, Think Little, that was really focused more on HERS ratings, both single family and multifamily, as well as sort of Fias consulting, CPHC type of work primarily. But now, my understanding is that Think Little has sort of consolidated with this new enterprise that you have. What is it called? The Comfort Squad? Is that
That's
who y'all
correct.
are?
That's
okay.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the Comfort Squad and how'd you get there?
Yeah. So I think early on in my career, I realized that, as a rater and consultant, that the HVAC designs and HVAC installations, among all of the different things that needed, fixing and addressing in the residential home performance market, HVAC was the one that probably was going to have the biggest impact and was the furthest behind. And so I started getting educated and, reaching out to, whatever resource I could find to get up to speed, and then started doing HVAC designs for some of our clients. And then we would be doing tail end airflow commissioning on the back end. Other people were installing them. And so that was a good first step, and we were doing more and more and more of that for our local projects, and even doing some multifamily designs. And I always thought, just with the headaches we had getting installers to install things the way we wanted them installed, that it would always be better if we just installed them ourselves. But that wasn't my skill set. The duct installation, HVAC installation, technician, repair, servicing. So I needed to find the right partner, and eventually I did through Brian Orr's Facebook group, HVAC School, which is a great Facebook group if you want to have an online HVAC forum. But yeah, I through that group met my now partner, Neil Comparetto, who has been a HVAC technician for over 20 years. And somewhere after his first decade of work, he took a class with NCI and caught the home performance bug, which happens to a lot of people who go through NCI. And he was like, wow, my mind is blown, and this completely changes the trajectory of his career. And then we met up in 2017. I pitched him the idea to start a company together. We kind of kicked that around for a couple of years and then launched that in 2019 as a separate company from Think Little, with the idea that we'd probably wind up merging them together. And so that's what we did in 2022. We merged them together, we rebranded as the Comfort Squad, and then we started a transition to really focus just on HVAC installations, with consulting really being a side business that we only offer to our HVAC installation clients. So yeah, that's where we are now. It's been a lot of fun making that transition. I think I got tired of being the green building referee personally, and I it's great designing stuff and working with our squads, getting it installed, and seeing it perform in the real world and sharing that with everybody. So that's really rewarding, and so we're having a good time, and we're starting to make good money. So it's it's good.
Yeah. All right. That's right. You can do this work.
That's right. Yeah,
and
you can make money.
You can make money.
That's right.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. No, that's important. That's really important.
It is. No, it's absolutely fundamentally important. Is because as I talk to people, look, we're all nerds. We're all in this because we're probably environmentalists at heart, and we care about this work. But this is also a business podcast. We're all in business here. And it's important for us to treat ourselves like that, for us to not just make decisions strictly based off of sort of our ethics, but because it is also good for what we're trying to do for ourselves, for our communities, our families, so on and so forth. So John, I'm going to come back to you on that because I kind of want to know more about your experience. But Brynn, your background, my understanding is you're more you've got a family history in HVAC, correct? So
Correct.
you kind of grew up in the trade and then sort of found building performance, sort of along the way. Maybe can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my parents started a mechanical business probably in the early 1980s. So obviously, me and my siblings were all employees by default. So as the business was growing, we were traditional, mom and pop's company. We were competing in the residential market. And as my parents transitioned out, and I assumed control of the company, I always kind of felt something was missing. We would have those slow seasons that were brutal, that every contractor was experiencing, and I just kind of felt like we were missing a lot of opportunities in houses. So probably I'll say 20 years ago I got into building science, and like John mentioned, once your mind is expanded and you see the benefits of building science, you can't turn back. So we implemented building science into our contracting business, and it did a few things for us. Number one, we were able to find a lot of problems that we were not looking for. We were able to identify shell issues. We discovered that every system we came across was grossly oversized by 50%. We discovered that every duct system we ran into was, horribly inadequate. So now that we had this newfound knowledge, we were able to resolve a lot of these problems, and it separated us from the pack. So as we continue to develop those building science, those habits, our company started to benefit from it. So building science is a huge piece of our business. We, after the core business of heating and cooling, we ventured into electrical and then building shell work. So that's the home performance piece of it. And then 2010, to share our learnings with other contractors, we started a training business called HVAC. So HVAC was designed for the busy contractor to help them learn about building science, to help them learn about load calc and duct design. Primarily, we were geared to contractors trying to help them enhance technician training, maybe to reduce a number of callbacks, the revenue loss to rework. We were looking to help technicians get credentials so they can get better positioned in their careers. And now it's transitioning from a technical company, and we're hoping to launch into a full-blown trade school. So both of those have building science deeply embedded into them.
Yeah, well, I can only say bless you, sir, for being here, because having grown up in Southfield, Michigan and in Detroit, I can tell you that we have some of the absolute least efficient buildings in the entire country. And our, specifically said ducts, our ducts suck. They're the worst ducts in the whole country. Honestly, you wouldn't believe the amount of new construction homes that you'll go into today being built right now in Southeast Michigan, where you can hook up a duct blaster and you can't even get to 5 pascals of pressure. I'm not kidding. The whole can't reach, pressure factor, and you got to you try to, you get flows that are greater than, the entire, flow of the air handler somehow, especially if you're using a Minneapolis duct blaster, at least. It's beyond the pale here. And so, when I found out that Brynn was actually focused on this, because don't get me wrong, I know a few good insulators in town, and who do know a thing or two about air barriers and air sealing. So that's good. And then I know just a couple of reliable HVAC contractors, but even then it's kind of they're good, but not necessarily really on top of it. So when I found out, that Brynn had this going on, I was like, thank goodness, because now I have somebody to refer it to, because I don't really, as BER, by and large, I'm not engaging with too much local consulting, and certainly not with home performance retrofit type of work. Occasionally I go and investigate some things, in case, a client specifically is asking for me, or it makes sense. But, in general, I'm pleased to have somebody to refer this to. Brynn, I guess when you kind of caught that building science bug, what were the things that you realized were maybe a disconnect between your standards of practice sort of historically as an HVAC contractor and kind of to what you now know as being how to approach, your inspections and sort of validating customer complaints about comfort and energy bills? What was the light bulb that really went off?
So we had those bad habits that most contractors had. We would get to a client, they were in the market to replace, let's say, a four-step furnace, and no low count, we would replace the size that they had, and it would work, and the customers were happy. But I would get feedback like, the room upstairs is still not comfortable. And you would hear that a lot. And for the longest, without adequate training, I thought that was just a symptom of the house. Like, you really couldn't do anything about it. Learning the building science aspect will really help me to understand that there's a way you can test for everything, and there's a solution for everything. You just have to know how to test and get the data. So kind of the first things that we implemented once we figured out that it was horribly underdeveloped practice in our local area was load calcs. Like I said, the bad habit was to swap the box with what you had. Or if the customer complained, if 3-ton didn't work, let's put a 4-ton in. It was that kind of, and that mentality still happens today. And, once you realize how a load is done and how low the load actually is, even with an inadequate shell, is mind-boggling, that a lot of this equipment, air conditioning wise, is a ton or more larger than what it needs to be, and actually it's kind of counterintuitive. So as I talk to contractors, there's some resistance there because they have that tribal knowledge, that gut reaction that they can't let go until they get that building science bug. So those are some of the things that we saw up front. Then after the load count, we found out, hey, if we properly size it, the ducts now work. Now that room that was always uncomfortable now is performing a little bit better. Okay, what's the other piece of this? And then we addressed the duct system, and then the ducts were not sized right, and we had to do duct mods. So that slow season kind of developed into, maybe we can schedule some of these duct modifications in this slow period of time. So we're able to expand our revenue just because we increased our knowledge.
Got it. Yeah. And I think that's probably really counterintuitive to a lot of people. You decreased the size of the equipment, but you increased the comfort really by doing nothing else. And it's really because, if you have short cycling equipment, it runs really hard and it will meet the thermostatic set point wherever the thermostat is located. Mm-hmm. But, if you have, leaky ducts, which again, we do have leaky ducts, and if you have sort of a not very great building shell, which again, the average home here in Michigan doesn't really have the best building enclosure. It's not that airtight. That means that, you don't let the system run enough to try to, mix things around. Now, obviously, tightening up the building, improving insulation, potentially making duct modifications, that's kind of all the next step in all this. But, just decreasing the size of the equipment and letting it run longer was able to promote, better comfort. John, where you're working there in Virginia, it's not quite as extreme in terms of cold, but obviously it's quite a bit warmer. In general, we get hot and humid here in Michigan, but frankly speaking, we've had a couple of days that were over 90, but it's in general we don't get that, like the real heat wave that we've been experiencing around the country on the East Coast. My guess is you've been having some really hot days. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've been up to 98, 99 so far, but a whole bunch of days over 90, a whole bunch of days over design temperature. Yep.
Yeah. And you're from there, so you've probably seen it, like here in Michigan. People can say whatever they want, but the climate has certainly changed here in Detroit.
I'm actually a Chicago boy, Chicago suburbs.
Okay. I think I knew that. All right. Well, but you've been there. How long have you been there for?
20 years.
20 years. All right. So, anecdotally, does it seem like you're getting more of these heat waves?
For us, this is actually the first year in over a decade where it's been extreme.
Okay.
A lot of the other heat waves that other parts of the country have seen over the past 4 or 5 years, we haven't seen any, really big ones. We've just had like normal hot weather is what I would call it. This year, it's definitely above normal. So, yeah, I kind of expect that we'll continue to see, above normal or above historical average, hot weather in our summers.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I'm sure you're still working on some really fantastic new housing that's really, kind of doing some, exemplary things. But I also imagine with this new business, the Comfort Squad, I'd assume you're getting brought into a lot of legacy homes, existing housing stock. And, so I guess I know a little bit less, but I would assume that the housing stock maybe skews a little bit more on the newer side. Here in Michigan, our vintage is probably here in the Detroit metro area is probably like in the 1940s on average. So we have some newer development, but our newer development is like stuff that was built in like the 70s and 80s in a lot of places. What's it like down there? What are the real pain points for customers that you're trying to help them with?
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty big range in terms of the age of our housing stock. We have, some houses that go back to the 1800s. We have lots of houses from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. That's probably kind of the biggest housing boom. And then, we do work on a good bit of new construction, custom homes. So I think the people come to us, I think, they come to us for three main reasons. If, for an existing home, they come to us with a comfort issue, or they come to us because they've got a big indoor air quality issue, or they come to us because they want to electrify. And sometimes it's, multiples of those, but it's usually one of those three things. And in terms of outcomes, we try to give them all of those three things. Better comfort, better indoor air quality, and if they don't already have an all-electric house, which is fairly common here in Virginia already, we're most of the time moving them to an all-electric HVAC system, even if they're not asking for it particularly.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes, I think, all the sense in the world in a mixed climate. What are you mainly climate zone 4, probably?
Right. Where we work at, we're climate zone 4, although in another 10 years, we'll probably be considered climate zone 3, the way the map is moving.
Uh-oh.
Yep.
I always see that too I don't know about that, ASHRAE. If somebody from ASHRAE is listening to me, you're kind of hurting us, because for those who don't know, when I can't remember which standard it came out of. It came out of some ASHRAE standard, but the practical implication is with the IECC moving from the 2018 IECC to the 2021 IECC, some of the climate zone locations changed. So, basically counties, climate zones are defined on a county basis throughout the country in the IECC. And for the vast majority of the country, where things changed, they changed from going from a higher number to a lower number. And the implication of that practically is that usually the lower the number, then the lower the expectations in terms of like the thermal envelope performance or potentially even air tightness. So it's sort of like, well, as we're heating up the planet, and so these climates are becoming, a little bit more moderate, we're then making it that much easier for them to comply with code, which is seemingly would just be exacerbating the cycle. I suppose that ASHRAE probably is, they're probably sort of set on more of a scientific principle. We're going to define it based off of heating degree days, including degree hours. And so maybe they were just sort of forced to have to make these adjustments. But in Wisconsin, for example, it used to be all climate zone 6 and maybe a hint of 7. Now it's half climate zone 5, and so, in Milwaukee, you used to have to, button up a little bit more on your thermal enclosure. And now they're down to climate zone 5 for a lot of it. So anyhow, that is an aside. So John, I've always known you to be a electrification advocate. That's just sort of in your DNA from the day that I met you. you might have even been wearing that shirt or a version similar to that, because you've always been about this. Tell us, and state the obvious. Feel free to state the obvious why. And why are you as focused on it as you are with your current business?
Yeah, well, I think big picture, our in terms of our global or our country's economy, we have a pathway to run our whole economy on clean energy. It's not easy, but there is actually a somewhat clear, largely clear pathway to running our economy on clean energy and reducing all kinds of pollution. And that involves moving everything nearly to electricity, powering all of our devices by electricity and making that electricity through clean sources. And so that, we don't have any other real viable pathway with other fuels to operate them without massive pollution worldwide. And so that's kind of really the, what it boils down to in terms of my vision for how we fit into that world. And so we focus on the residential sector. I love homes. I love helping people make comfortable, more efficient homes that are healthier. And we can do this. We have the know-how. We have the technology. The equipment is getting better on top of that. It's not perfect for all locations all the time and in all climate zones. So we do need some improvement in some places. But I think especially where we are in Central Virginia, we're in a great spot, and anywhere warmer than us is in a great spot. And we have reliable electricity. We have relatively inexpensive electricity. So we're in a really good place to electrify a ton of our economy and really get that ball rolling.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me, and, if we are kind of looking at obviously there's the environmental case, and I think that, you did not necessarily give the impassioned sales pitch that I thought that you would, perhaps, John, about the critical need to do this. But I'm assuming that you're assuming an educated listener that generally believes that climate change is real and that pollution is real. And I'd always try to drive that home, because there's probably a couple of people listening that are like, yeah, climate change, I don't know, whatever, maybe it's real, maybe it's not. Look, everybody has to breathe air. Everybody has to drink water. Everybody has to eat food. All these, there's a lot of political, consternation out there about, the estronization of society. Well, guess what? It doesn't just come from plastic. It also comes from hydrocarbons that are in our food and water. And so, if you're concerned, everybody wants to say they're doing it. The boogeyman is changing our kids into these new things, and they're changing genders and all this. It's not just about power. If you're worried about that stuff, the boogeyman is us, or the systems that are convincing us to continue to go down this path of wanton fossil fuel abuse. And that's what I'm calling it. I'm calling it fossil fuel abuse, because I think, rationally speaking, we're not going to be able to just turn off the tap tomorrow.
No, yeah. There has to be there has to be a transition. There's just, this is, a 100+ year, giant infrastructure that we have. There's no way to do it responsibly overnight. It's impossible, literally impossible to do it overnight. And so, there has to be a transition. And that's good, because a lot of our sectors that we need to transition are slow to change. There's a lot, and especially, buildings, very slow to change. And that's, there's some good things there and there's some bad things there, but we know it's going to be a slow transition for houses. We know it's, even starting now, it's going to take, 30, 40, 50 years, maybe more, depending on how hard we push and what kind of carrots and sticks everybody has available to help with that transition.
Okay, so John, you're a completely rational human being, just as I've always known you to be, and I mean it's refreshing to hear that out of you, because I got to say, I recently have gotten a little bit more engaged on LinkedIn, and it's for better, for better or worse, right? The good thing is I met Brynn, and I wouldn't have known about him necessarily had I not been more engaged online. But we get into a lot of arguments, especially with one another within our own tribe, about this topic of electrification. And I have had multiple people reach out to me post listening to the BERcast and saying, "Chris, you're against electrification, and that's wrong. You're not doing enough." And I have gone out of my way multiple times over to try to say, I am all about it. I hope to do it for all of my life, and my friends and neighbors. I want to push everybody to get this done sooner rather than later. But you went back and said, the technology isn't perfect. This is a transition. I don't know that everybody in our community totally respects that. I think that they want it to be right now for everywhere, and anything less than that is a sellout position. But the reality is, I made a post here on LinkedIn, about, our utility rates here in Michigan.
Yeah,
and
I saw
this
that
went,
one. I saw that
this
one.
went viral. This
Yeah.
is the only time that, Chris Mack's ever blown up on the internet. But, this thing went viral. And I think that the reason why is because I think a lot of people didn't like it. Maybe people who are the skeptics did like it. I wasn't trying to say don't electrify, but what I was saying is data came out from our utilities, our two main utilities here in Michigan, that defined the utility rates that we're supposed to use in our HERS ratings for basically the costs of fuels. And based off of that, it turned out to be that electricity is a lot more expensive per BTU. Natural gas is 7 times less expensive. So electricity is about 7 times more expensive. And there's the distribution and sort of service fees. And so there is some moderation there. Heat pumps are more than 100% efficient, but the rub on it was, by and large, if you do the math, you would need a heat pump that had a coefficient of performance of greater than 6 in order to equal sort of, what you'd get out of a 95% furnace. And my point of this was just to say, it's a tough sell. It hurts the sales pitch for electrification. Doesn't mean don't do it. If you're building a brand new house that's high performance, absolutely do it. Even if you have an existing home, if you think that you can button it up and do the necessary shell improvements to tighten it and have some insulation and make sure that the system's going to operate well, you might be able to throw solar on your house and get pretty close to net zero. So I want to make sure people understand, I'm not saying do not electrify buildings, but I'm just saying that here in Michigan, the cost spread, it is more challenging. And so, Brynn, I saw that you saw this post and kind of chimed in, and you were like, yeah, what he's saying is true. I mean, what's your take on this, Brynn? Because I know that you're kind of like right in the battleground of this, boots on the ground. I'm sure you have customers who want to electrify. I know you've participated in some pilots. What's your experiences? I'd assume that you believe that this is the right thing to do, but I'm sure you also have to deal with customer expectations about what it's going to cost them moving forward.
Yeah, no, you both bring up good points. And I just want to say, I am for electrification. For climate reasons, it needs to be done. I think more of the problem is the hardcore electrification or else stance sometimes isn't productive. So like John had a good reasonable approach. We need to do it. He's aware, but he's also saying that it may not be the right fit for certain climate zones at this time unless the technology is there. And Michigan kind of falls into that. When we talk to contractors, one of the I guess the rubs against electrification, they'll say, well, you're just moving the smokestack. You're moving it locally from your house, and you're going to move it to the power plant. And kind of the response to that is electrical power is heavily regulated. It has to be clean, and the emissions are getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. Areas like Michigan, our combustion appliances are not. So it's nothing that tells or makes a customer tune their emissions to reduce, keep carbon dioxide to a minimum, or maybe control NOx. There's nothing to make customers do that. So with that being said, it needs to be done, but there's a lot of missing pieces. So for starters, everybody's not even acquainted with building science. We're still getting people introduced to what blower doors are and making the shell tight. And a lot of the IRA funding and stuff like that is geared towards heat pumps. My concern is that you get a person that's interested in a heat pump, and let's say the IRA may have a certain portion for low income housing. If that person gets that heat pump and they don't understand the bill implications of it going up without a weatherized shell, you can put that family in significant financial burden. So that's one reason why I agree with your post, is that if it's not done appropriately and customers are not educated well enough to make these decisions, we can be in some big trouble where this investment gets deployed and these customers and clients are going to start ripping this equipment out because it's just not sustainable. So in the pilot programs that we did here in Michigan is, like you mentioned, Chris, we have an older housing stock. Large portion of our homes don't have adequate insulation. Large portions of them never been professionally air sealed. So if I go full electrification on that house and I put an air source heat pump in with backup resistance heat, and even if the equipment is capable of going down to -20, like a lot of the equipment is, it's going to run continuously, and you're going to continue to have that consumption. So our approach and with our pilot programs, what we've done, we've said, okay, let's put an air source heat pump in. It modulates, and let's go with a dual fuel high efficiency furnace, and let's give that heat pump a economical balance point. So somewhere between 40 and 35 degrees, it trips. All right. It's not advantageous to run electric as a fuel at that point. 35 degrees and lower, maybe let's kick in the first stage of combustion. And then if it gets really cold, you got the second stage to support you. Or if you have a modulating piece of equipment, even better. So in the pilot programs that we ran, that was our approach. And it kind of helps us that way if the customer does go back and invest in the shell work after the heat pump was installed, you just made that heat pump run a little bit better, and maybe a little bit lower economical balance point. But what's happening, you're going to have a lot of customers purchase the heat pump and the HVAC equipment first prior to weatherizing the shell. And I don't think we're doing enough as an industry to communicate kind of how bad of an idea that is.
I just want to chime in that this Brynn's approach here for your situation in Michigan is perfect. Like, that is the practical approach for the average customer who's ready for that change out. It makes so much sense. You're going to get like a 70, 80% electrification of their annual heating load without pissing people off. And you're probably going to reduce their costs slightly while you wait for stuff that you don't have control over, which is your electricity prices and your natural gas prices. Hopefully that gap is going to come down. Hopefully that's mostly going to come down because electricity gets cheaper. That's possible. I think your electricity prices are stupid crazy for where you are in the country. You shouldn't, and for your grid operator, it's just nuts.
Whereas, John, you don't even want to get us started here. Now, both Brynn and I do a little bit of business with the utilities, so we got to play nice here. But we got a special system here, and the kind of ain't that special kind of a thing. Like, honestly, it's great to have regulated utilities. We also pay a lot, and we also have a lot of outages here in Michigan. Yeah. So, hey, that's another reason to potentially throw some solar on your house, is get some batteries and maybe have a little bit of backup. But sorry, John, keep going.
Yeah. No, I mean, it, what to do and how to approach it from a business standpoint, that it really is very regional, and it's going to be different here than it is in Michigan, than it is in than it is in Texas, and it is in, the maritime of Canada. So, yeah.
We're different up here for sure.
Yeah, and so Natasha, we've kind of don't want to neglect you. We want to understand what is the conversation that's happening here now in Halifax. You're obviously not running an HVAC or home performance business, but you were in the business of supporting contractors and builders and homeowners for close to 15 years in what you did through an efficiency focused utility there in Nova Scotia. So, I mean, I think the dynamic there is a little bit different. I'd assume because heat pumps are probably viewed almost like a savior in a lot of ways there, because fuel oil is kind of expensive and not that efficient, and electric resistance heating is also expensive and not that efficient. So is it a little bit more of just sort of a straightforward sales pitch to go all electric there?
I wouldn't even say it's like a sales pitch anymore. About 10 years ago, heat pumps just boomed here, and now it's like next to impossible to find a new home that's built without a heat pump implemented in some way, whether it's a ductless split or centralized system. The big thing that we have here, and that a lot of people are still very kind of, the electrification argument is still kind of tricky here, is because we are primarily a coal-driven grid. Most of our electrification comes from coal and is generated through burning of coal, about 60%, in fact. We do have some tidal, we do have some wind, but it's very heavy still on the fossil fuel side. So a lot of people who are kind of downplaying electrification are like, well, we're still got such a dirty grid. Does it really make sense when you look at like the GHG emissions from the savings? But if we purely look at it from a savings standpoint, what 80% of existing homes in Nova Scotia have oil-based heat. And right now, oil is $1.25 a liter. It's really expensive, so Canadian. So about $1 a liter US. And electricity's 17 cents per kilowatt hour. So when you kind of compare systems, and I used to do this a lot, was kind of go through, okay, what type of home are you living in? Are you living in a new home? Are you doing a renovation? Like, what's the age of the home? What heating system are you using right now? What are you looking to transition to? And how much roughly is that going to save you on your bill, and kind of what condition your home is in versus like the upgrades that you've done as well. Because it really varies. I mean, we've got homes here that are 120 years old, and we have a lot of stock that's newer. But even, for example, last week I was in my parents' home, 20-year-old home, and they went from oil forced air heat 10 years ago and installed a centralized heat pump, and they're still dealing with comfort issues. And so the problem that we're having is that we've electrified very fast and had a lot of people transition to electric systems, but the HVAC contractors have not come with it necessarily in terms of understanding everything and the intricacies of the heat pumps that they're installing. And we're running into a lot of homeowners having issues then with the heat pumps. I've come across systems that didn't even have any refrigerant charged in them to be able to run. So we've got lots of systems being installed saying you're going to achieve this, but because of the way that they've been installed, the homeowners are not experiencing that. So they're still known as like the elite, like heat pumps are still the elite here, especially in Nova Scotia, but we're still running into problems because they're not being installed or commissioned correctly for the property they're going in. And in the situation with my parents' home, because they've gone from an oil air handling unit that was pumping out 80,000 BTUs of heat and short cycling to now a 24,000 BTU system, they're finding it's cold because their ductwork wasn't changed when they installed that system. They literally took the old one out, put the heat pump in, kept the same ductwork. I did duct leakage testing on their home a couple weeks ago, 25% leakage to outside in that home because nothing was ever done to and that's a 20-year-old home, so not an old home.
Still beats Southeast Michigan. Sorry to say.
Yeah. But it was mind-blowing, and that's why their temperatures are inconsistent and they're having comfort issues. So we can put the most supreme system in and kind of electrify the grid, but if people are not trained on how to install these supreme systems in a way that's making sure that the home is then comfortable with that system, it causes a lot of problems and it causes a lot of concern with the general population, and then it kind of badmouths this move that is slowly transitioning and that we need to make towards kind of cleaner energy available on the grid. So,
and that's kind of the number two thing that I'm a little bit anxious about that I continue to bring up. So number one is the cost. In some areas, like here in Michigan, the sales pitch for it on a cost basis really isn't there. I hate to say it, but the other thing is I'm just anxious that people get too much of the heat pump buzz, and that it's, every contractor is now rushing to throw them in because there's a big rebate, but they're not doing any of the other necessary steps in order to get it right. And then we have this sort of, this knee-jerk reaction to society away from this stuff because it really wasn't done right. So Brynn, you've been trying to weigh in here. How do you counteract that? Obviously, you started an HVAC school online focused on this, so that's part of it. But what else?
I just have to say, Natasha hit the nail absolutely on the head. So one thing you have to consider is the difference in technology between combustion and electrification, like an air source heat pump. So those bad practices that, are still in existence that, we've done for decades, I can put a oversized furnace on a leaking duct system, and the discharge air temperature was so warm that I can still have a relatively comfortable house. You take a heat pump as compared to a furnace may push out 140, 150 degrees in a supply duct. You take a heat pump, 90, maybe 100 if it's a super efficient system, a lot lower where it can actually cause chills if air blows on people. So the part about the ducts, if the ducts are not sized appropriately, and if the shell is not done appropriately, and if the load calc is not done appropriately, all things that we're woefully not doing. We don't have the infrastructure for training, and we don't have the infrastructure to require these things. We're setting ourselves up as an industry to have a big problem in, say, 10 years by all this equipment going in that's not commissioned, that's not delivering what it's supposed to. And this huge investment is going to be wasted. And eventually the taxpayers, they end up paying for that issue.
John, please tell us, but how are you getting it right? Because obviously, I think the cost issue isn't necessarily quite as extreme there. Your temperature range that like an air source heat pump would have to operate under is probably going to allow it, if properly designed and properly installed, to operate on a seasonal average of probably closer to like a 3 or something like that. Maybe just a hair under that, I would imagine. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. So we've got we definitely have a much smaller gap between the electricity price and the gas price. Our gas all in, we're in the $1 per therm or slightly over $1 per therm, which I think is, close to the nationwide average. You guys are like 20% below that, or maybe even more. And then our electricity price, we're like all in, all taxes, all fees, basically 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So much less expensive than where you are. And then, with our milder temperatures and good installation and good equipment, we're going to have better efficiencies just naturally than a colder place. So that all of those are working in our favor. And so, even in a difficult case, most of our clients are, they're coming out like break even. Costs, and then with better equipment, more efficient equipment, or depending on what we're comparing it to, are we comparing it to a 80% furnace or the 95% furnace? Right. Then they might come out slightly ahead. Like, are we comparing it to their existing 80%, or are we comparing it to a 95 that we could put in? But anyway, in terms of operating costs, everybody's coming out ahead. None of our clients are coming to us either before or after and talking about operating costs ever.
Yeah, like which is great, because like
but they're not coming to us to get improvements in operating costs either.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're coming to us for other stuff. And a lot of it is just the equipment.
I hate to be the guy who comes off so focused on cost. It's not that like I feel like, well, if it costs $1 more on an annual basis to do electrification, then it doesn't make sense. No, obviously that's absurd. Yeah. I'm not saying that, but what I'm a little bit concerned that if people aren't prepared that there could be a change in costs and they're willing to buy into that, then that's the issue. I'm also concerned about like, well, if we try to mainstream this for lower income people, without really doing the math, and then all of a sudden, some people really can't afford to pay twice as much for their energy bill. See, this can't,
Right.
So sorry, don't mean to cut you off, but I feel like, this is part of the conversation. So
yeah, I think it's having that, grown up discussion with the client, like, is it, do we think it's, in Brynn's case, like, is it $100 more a year? Is it $200 more a year? Are you willing to trade that for better comfort? Are you willing to trade that for going from 80% electrification with a dual fuel system to 100% electrification, and then giving the client the choices. I think that's really important, giving them the information, and then being grown-ups around the table, and then installing it properly, whatever the choice is. But I think that the big move is getting the heat pumps in. Which I think was there's a lot of people, especially Nate Adams. I think he's right on with this topic. It was a big miss to not spend money in the IRA on getting manufacturers or distributors to get rid of ACs. Essentially, just incentivize heat pumps and disincentivize ACs, because the equipment cost difference is so close to one another. It's just so easy to put in a heat pump instead of an AC. And then the clients can get the operating costs. Everybody can get used to heat pumps, even if you don't go, fully electrify everything, if you go with that dual fuel system. And so now it's more, instead of it being like an automatic thing, because that's all that's available at the distributor is a heat pump, it's like somebody has to make a choice, and the installer has to offer it. And if they don't offer it, if you've got, it's still slightly easier to replace a furnace and AC with another furnace and AC, as opposed to putting in a furnace and heat pump. If that's the easier thing to do, especially during the busy times of year, we know the easy thing to do is the thing that gets done in June, July, August, and December, January, February. And that's the way our industry works to a large extent. So we got to make it easier for installers to make the right choice by making it the only choice.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. A big portion too, we have a lot of contractor resistance. You have, not only do you have hardcore electrification, you have hardcore anti-heat pump. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is based on the fear that maybe they don't work in cold climates, and they do. It's just that they have to be designed properly to be utilized in a cold climate. So to your point, I think contractor and installer training needs to be a big piece of kind of this electrification movement. So that way they're not afraid of it, and they can rest at night knowing that these systems they went in properly. They're not going to get phone calls from their customer, and everything's going to work out.
Yeah, they've got the training wheels still on, and they can take them off in 15, 20 years when it's time to replace that system down the road. Yep. Because this is a transition, and it's not, every single case is not ready for that full electrification from a climate, equipment, economic standpoint. We don't have it 100%. Where we are, nearly 100%. We're really close. The hard jobs that we have are where clients have an really inefficient enclosure, and they have radiators and a boiler, and they really want to keep their radiators without. We can do it. It's just really it's expensive. We can do it.
There's not that much hydronic heat pump technology yet, and so you're paying
in North America. especially
fair enough. I know I'm always jealous at all these great opportunities that are available over in Europe and in Asia. We're kind of we have to wait. Speaking of which, do you see a world where 5+ COP heat pumps are kind of like becoming mainstream here, maybe by the end of this IRA period for the home electrification program? Not trying to talk people out of doing it now, but if we had really good heat pumps, cold climate heat pumps, and when I say really good, I'm talking about stuff that gets us like a COP of 5 or more. If we had something like that, and if that were coming online here in the next handful of years, what I'm saying is I want to convince people to feel good about making buildings more efficient now.
Yeah.
Like John says, if you got to replace your AC, put in a heat pump because you might as well, because they don't really cost that much different, But in terms of someone who, is like me, all right, I'm going to tell the truth. I have a gas furnace. Y'all already knew that anyways, but I just do. And then because it costs a lot of money to run a heat pump here, and they're good, but they're not that great. And I don't necessarily think that every American shelling out twice as much in their heating bill to a corporation is necessarily how we should be spending our money. I'd rather go and give it to a soup kitchen or an animal shelter or something like that. If I'm going to spend all this extra money, there's a lot of other things to be doing. But if we can get some 5 COP heat pumps in the market here towards the tail end of this IRA period, that would be really juicy, and it would definitely incentivize me to go and do it. So what do you think, John? Is you getting excited about, CO2 based refrigerants, propane refrigerants? What do you think is actually going to happen here in the next, say, 5 to 10 years of manufacturing that really tips the scale?
I think we're just starting the transition now to the A2L refrigerants, the R32 and the 454B. And so those come with a little bit of efficiency bump, just in terms of their operating properties. Moving to propane gets you a bigger bump, but that probably starts to change the whole equipment design process. I think equipment that uses propane elsewhere in the world, they're all packaged systems. So all of the entire refrigerant cycle is contained in the outdoor unit, and then they're just moving water and glycol inside and outside. So there's no field connections with propane and fitting refrigerant pipes. So that, I think, we may get there at some point, but that's another really big change. So, but I think for the next 10 years, yeah, we've got better refrigerants from an efficiency standpoint. We have the opportunity for better equipment designs. There's a lot more efficient equipment elsewhere in the world that could be sold here in the US. There's, I know in the UK, there's a organization, heatpumpmonitor.org.
I just saw that the other day.
These guys, I've used some of their energy monitor stuff in the past, but so it's a open source community, voluntarily monitoring real time coefficient of performance on their heating systems, and they're getting up to like the low 5s for both domestic hot water and heating over the course of a full winter. Now, their climate compared to even ours is quite mild. It's like a longer winter, but milder. Like they have design temperatures of like freezing, like 30.
Natasha, tell us about it. You're from the UK.
Yeah, so I'm originally from the UK, and yeah, it's wet and mild and gloomy for 80% of the year. But it's still unusual when you go to the UK, and I was there 2 years ago, and here I'm so used to like every other house has a compressor outside of some kind, and you go there and it's still very like uncommon to see them, and to see those like compressors like outside or attached to buildings, residential buildings at least. Obviously commercial buildings are a little bit different, but you're starting to see them pop up. So it's happening everywhere. It's not just like North America. Like this move towards higher performing equipment is happening. And I know obviously Europe is known of being the best of the best, but we're doing a lot of great things here too. So yeah, but yeah, it's 80% of the time the weather sucks in the UK. So, but they've got good beer and very, very pretty landscape, so makes up for it.
But yeah, so I think we'll see, better and better efficiencies on heat pump systems. I think the manufacturers on the variable speed compressor systems have a lot of opportunities to, just through their controls, provide both better efficiency and better comfort. I think, we monitor a lot of stuff through either the manufacturer's monitoring systems or our own energy monitors. And sometimes something looks like really good on paper, and then when we look at how it actually performs in the real world, we're like, why is it like it just stuff is misbehaving, or it's performing different than the way you expect it to perform. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to fix stuff like that without changing any, even cost in terms of the equipment manufacturing.
All right, so I'm not hearing any necessarily dramatic technological shift that is immediately on the horizon from you, John. And if anybody were to know about it, I'd assume that you would be on trend. So what I'm really hearing is we got to focus on getting the existing equipment that we have right here over this next, sort of transitional period of time. And so I've heard some great ideas here. I've heard from Natasha that we have to install ductwork properly that's sealed, so that if you have a forced air system, for a heat pump, that the BTUs are going where they're supposed to go efficiently. Brynn, I've heard from you that getting actual load calculations performed correctly is really critical. I think that I want to tease that out a little bit more too, because I think getting them right, well, for a colder climate, what is the right way to get them right? Because there's the design temperature, there's the manual J, temp. So whatever, for Detroit, that might be about 5 degrees, but we also have to think about what happens if a customer wants it to perform down at -10 or -13 that the equipment's rated for. Well, do I go ahead and run the outdoor temp to -13? Sometimes I do. When I do it, I'll actually average and kind of do both, just to kind of get an idea and see where we're coming in. I don't know, Brynn, you got any thoughts about tricks of the trade for that?
I like a blower door to accompany my load calcs. I always found that those are the most accurate. You can use the descriptions for infiltration, but those are guesses. And we have the technology with the blower door to make them a lot more accurate. A good conversation with the customer. I know some areas of the country you're not allowed to design outside of like ACA's design temps. But with that being said, you do have to have a good conversation with the customer. Make sure that you're putting in a system and that you understand their wishes, their beliefs, their comfort, kind of how they operate their home. The other thing I'll say too is that whatever you put in, you have to have the duct capacity, like Natasha mentioned, for that to operate properly. So my load calcs always come with a blower door, just so I have a true air leakage number that I can trust, instead of estimating it based on nothing, based on the way a building looks. So that's typically what we do.
Okay, John, what about you? What hacks you got on how to get load calcs right?
Yeah, blower door numbers, definitely. The other thing that we find just through the monitoring is that the manual J heating load calcs, which is, that's the manual J, there's nothing special about a manual J heating load calc compared to older school heating load calcs. It's still, it's U value times area times delta T for each of your components, and then you're throwing in air leakage and ventilation, and that just add it all up. That generally yields a very conservative number that probably in reality doesn't, the building probably doesn't really see that until it's significantly colder than that design temperature. So when I'm sizing equipment on the heating, when I'm looking at the heating performance for equipment, I'm taking my manual J number and our design temperature of 19 degrees, and I'm actually assuming that heat loss isn't going to happen until 10 degrees or maybe even colder, in order to estimate like how is the system actually going to perform, how much supplemental heat do we need to provide, what's the temperature balance point likely to be for this particular heat pump. So I think that's something, and that I think just the real world performance is, we, in terms of like our monitored stuff, we, in the real world, we come a lot closer to the edge of satisfactory performance on the cooling side compared to the heating side. The heating side, everything is, we never have issues. On the cooling side, like, if we have a client who decide, who, if we didn't do our job and, we find out after the fact that they want to keep their house at 68, but we designed it to 75 with a small buffer, we might only be able to get it down to 71 when it's 100 degrees outside. And so we have those cases here and there on the cooling side, and we never have that issue on the heating side. So I think that's something that it's just another thing that through experience and through monitoring, the real world monitoring that we have done in the past and continue to do is just absolute gold from a experience standpoint. Like not getting a callback is not, that's not a, that doesn't inform what to do next time. Whereas like checking back on the heat pump that you installed on that coldest January morning of the year and seeing how it's doing, and seeing that the auxiliary heat didn't even kick on when it was 5 degrees outside because the heat pump was covering it, even though your load calc said it should have come on, 10 degrees warmer than that. Like, that's real stuff. And then if it's just not one of those, you've got 10, 20, 30 different clients where you can actually go to the monitor numbers and see the performance. Then you're like, okay, that's a real trend. And then you can start changing your practices and being a little bit less conservative in terms of the system sizing. And we all know, especially on the heating side, it's just so easy to be like 2x, 3x, 4x oversized on furnaces. And there's going to be the tendency for people to want to do that with heat pumps.
Even worse
in your cold climates.
Yeah, I mean, I would say here in Michigan, people, I've seen contractors that they want to oversize it even relative to a known oversized furnace, just as sort of just a fudge factor, just to make sure, and then, homeowners are getting killed with energy bills, and then they can't dehumidify the home in the summertime, because then the cooling side is just heat pumps already, especially ductless systems, already kind of have some issues with dehumidification potentially. But then when they're grossly oversized, then we have real big issues with that. So that's kind of good to know your anecdotal experience. I mean, what John's talking about is, Manual J is sort of a very worst case conservative approach. There's no solar gain coming in through the windows. There's no interior gains that are useful at the time of the absolute coldest day of the year.
There's no thermal mass.
Yeah, there's no thermal mass. There's no resilience in the building. So I have a customer who built a passive house, and he was just like, even with some pretty good sizing and thought that went into it, he was just like, this building, because it's so massive, it has such thick walls and thick insulation, and we're just, we just don't use, we conserve a lot more heat, we just buffer a lot better. So I don't know, maybe we got to, get with the DOE Building America program and put out a call for an actual program for monitoring, because it'd be nice to know what those reasonable fudge factors are. Because at this point, what I'm hearing is that even going with Manual J, while that's better than not doing load calcs at all, even that may be a little bit too conservative. And the issue here, it's not just about getting it right so it costs a little bit less in terms of the system installation. The issue is that the bigger your systems, even if they have the same COP or HSPF values, the issue is that the compressors are bigger. The blower motors are bigger. And so even though you might have the same efficiency value, the reality is you're consuming more. The bigger that your equipment gets, and I don't think every HERS rater really totally gets that. They're just used to looking up AHRI and going and figuring out what the HSPF values are. And as long as the HSPF is good, then it's good enough. No, but the issue is that the bigger systems, when it comes to these electric-based systems, you're really going to be consuming a lot more electricity. And so ultimately, if we don't want people to be dissatisfied and getting sticker shock, we have to think about that. Brynn, what other tips of the trade for getting electrification right? What else can we be doing from your perspective?
Specification. So just knowing your situation, talking to the customers and maybe trying to get them to weatherize their shell first. If you don't do that work, maybe partner up with a contractor that does do that, so that it's going to make that low calc even lower. So I think that's kind of the first piece to make sure that the shell sounds like Natasha agrees. Then if they can't, or if it's not in the scope or not in the budget, or the agencies that they're working with are not doing that, go on a dual fuel approach. I know one thing we see a lot in Michigan where people are going all electric. If you size to the heating load with the heat pump, sometimes you will, or all the time, you will have humidity control problems. And if that's the case, knowing your situation, you may have to get supplemental dehumidification just to kind of keep that family comfortable in the summertime. So knowing each of your situations, but always start with the shell. Air sealing, most important thing you can do. You reduce sensible load, latent load. You can reduce indoor air quality issues, which we didn't talk about a ton, but it's also tied into this big time. Making sure that the shell is sound, and then going for the heat pump. So that's kind of the first conversation we have. If they can't do that, then dual fuel kind of covers the electrification and then gives us the backup for those cold winter nights.
Okay, John, other hacks to get this thing right? What are you thinking?
Oh, yeah, I think most of the country has ducted systems. There's a lot of bad ductwork out there. I guess you guys have the worst of it. Although there's a lot of really bad ductwork in California. Especially the milder parts of California. Anyway, getting the system sized right is a really big deal, because if you're able to kind of reduce that airflow from where you are now with a bad duct system, maybe a high pressure duct system, and get that airflow down to a right size system, you can really basically do some magic, just by going down a half a ton or even a ton in capacity, or going down 200 or 400 CFM in design airflow makes a really big difference to a duct system, and saves a whole bunch of energy. If you have duct leakage issues in that system that maybe you're not able, or the customer is not able financially to adjust right now, reducing that duct pressure is going to reduce the duct leakage naturally. So it's a really good thing to do in all the situations that you can.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and throw to that point about addressing system pressure, folks. We got to put in enough returns in homes, or make them the right size. So BER, we've gone around the country teaching the ResNet ACA 310 standard, the HVAC grading standard. And so, we've been brought out in order to teach on behalf of some utilities that are really promoting electrification, and we went to a house that had a single return, which I'm not actually opposed to single returns necessarily. I think that they can be done correctly, but it was a restrictive single return. And so, this cold climate heat pump, really good, 11 HSPF system or something like that. It looked really good on paper. It was operating at 0.9 inches of water column, and so for those who aren't, total nerds like the rest of us here on the call, the practical implication for that is that that system is probably operating closer to, I don't know, like around a 7 or an 8 HSPF, something like that, because the blower motor just has to fight so much resistance, basically, in order to keep people comfortable. And there's a question whether or not, I don't even think we were getting all the airflow, because that's another thing. People don't realize this. They think, oh, well, ECM systems, they're a magic bullet. They will fight static pressure to deliver airflow at the expense of more consumption, but to a limit. At a certain point, then the airflow starts to drop off. So the problem is, not only is your blower fan working harder, consuming more, but then you have the full compressor speed basically going on, but you're getting less BTUs because you have less airflow through the system. So static pressure is really critical. John, I saw you make a piece about, you just kind of adjusted filters, and you were able to get a really significant pressure drop, improvement on a system. Yeah. So, people, 1-inch pleated filters, those are trash. Throw them away. Stop using them. And it's not because having high MERV values is bad either. So contractors, get that out of your brain. It's not just that the high MERV value is the problem. The problem is that you can't put that much capture media in a 1-inch package. You got to spread it out across 4 inches or 5 inches. And then we can have high MERV values and it doesn't kill the system with excessive static pressure. Brynn, you got any thoughts about reducing static pressure?
Yeah, I was a couple points. And you and I are in basement country, Chris, and we got a lot of basement and ducted returns. A lot of times to reduce the static and improve airflow, if you change the return air fitting to plenum, maybe a long radius with turning vanes and the supply air, making that rounded with turning vanes, you can get your static down quite a bit without maybe a full 100% duct mod. So that's been a go-to for ours to change the near air handler fittings to get static pressure down. And then testing in and testing out. A lot of contractors don't carry the equipment to test in or test out. So static pressure, I know my days as a teenager and I was an installer, we turned the equipment on and fired up, we were out of there. That was our commissioning. Now you can measure airflow and take static pressure and actually see what the system is doing and make, adjustments and tweaks and stuff like that. So it needs to be a more focus on
that. Okay. Yep. So, I don't know, Natasha, I mean, it seems like y'all have more ductless systems than you have ducted systems up there in Halifax. So maybe some of these issues about ducts and static pressure are less critical, perhaps. So, when we're thinking about ductless design, you have any kind of hints and tips when it comes to that?
Yeah, I mean, the big reason why we have a lot of ductless systems is because in the 80s, a lot of homes here got built with electric baseboard in them, and people wanted a ductless option. And my house, for example, also has hot water baseboards, but oil driven. So you've even got forced air or you've got baseboards, and you can't run air through, obviously, them. So yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that we struggle with here and in terms of scoping out ductless systems is people's home layout. So if they're very compartmentalized in the home and they don't have good runs for air to kind of naturally filter through the home, they end up having to put in so many heads that it makes it cost prohibitive to do it. So head placement is really, really important. And that's one thing that when I was getting my heat pumps installed in this house, I had a few contractors out and I was kind of curious to see what their take was on where they were going to place the heads, because we have a very narrow hallway that pretty much runs the entire length of the home, but it's still very sectioned off from some of the main rooms where we would want that heating and air conditioning to be present. So and there's 4 that came and only 1 got the same answer that I would have provided. And yeah, it was so interesting to see the variety of options depending on the contractor who was in assessing the situation. So I can see a big issue with head placement, and some people don't want that blowing right on top of them either. And so placing it somewhere where it's not like blowing directly on the occupants of the home while also providing comfort for the space overall it's kind of tricky with ductless systems. So we're starting to see more ductless systems, but with like cassettes and miniature ducting kind of to various rooms from them. But they're still very like widely not available. So
Yeah. It's
yeah,
tricky,
it's
because,
tricky.
we've got manual D and all this stuff that really tells us how to do duct design, manual D, manual T. There isn't a really great ACA standard necessarily on mini split design. The low load home book has some sort of concepts in it, but in some ways I even feel that really doesn't adequately cover ductless applications. So, John, what are you thinking? Do you do very much ductless applications? And how do we get
No.
ductless correct? No, oh, nobody does it. Okay.
No. I mean, we do them here and there. It's almost never our first choice. We like really good indoor air quality, and so we like really good filters. You can't do that with ductless. We try not to blow air on people. It's hard to do that with ductless. People don't like the space that it takes up on their walls, except on the other hand, people seem to love these really old radiators. I don't get it. But
yeah, can somebody please design like a nice looking ductless heat pump,
there's some
unit?
coming. There's some coming.
Yeah, I
out.
saw one that was coming out, but it was only available in California that had a nice like wood veneer on it. But all right, so I've got a tip then. I'm going to go ahead and throw one out here because I did a very interesting house. I did their HVAC design here in Detroit. It was a 3D printed house. It was 3D extruded, mortar-based cavities, and they filled it full of foam. And thank goodness they ended up wrapping the exterior with foam too, because they weren't going to do that initially, and that would have been really bad from a thermal bridging standpoint. But so I did their HVAC design, and I specified it was a small home, 1,000 square feet ballpark. I specified one single ceiling recessed ductless cassette, basically, and so no ducts. And in the main body of the house, ceiling fans in every bedroom, a small baseboard electric unit in every bedroom that could be individually modified just in case someone needed to take a chill off, and then a ERV in order to sort of distribute good air quality. And they've been running it now for a year. And even when we had the more extreme cold where it was getting down, below zero, the heat pump kept up by its own. Nobody needed to use the electric resistance, so I've talked with them about maybe getting rid of it. The trick is that some code departments will not allow you to do complete ductless, basically. They don't believe that it's going to work, or they think that you have to have heat in every single bedroom. So that was sort of my cheap way out. And people will say, well, why wouldn't you just put a head in every room? Again, two things. Number one, this equipment is kind of expensive. I was trying to help them have a more affordable type of process. Number two, the heads only get to be so small, and so the reality is to get, for tiny little bedrooms, to get an appropriate size mini split head, we don't really have them yet. Maybe we'll have these sort of like quarter-ton units at some point that might make sense, but we don't really have those yet. And you'd have to oversize the outdoor compressor to get a multi-zonal application in order to fit this house, because this only needed a 1.5-ton unit in the dead of winter in Detroit, Michigan, because your good buddy Chris Mack did his load calcs, and he looked at it both ways. He looked at it at 5, and he looked at it at -10, and you know what? 1.5 was going to do just fine. So I don't know, John, you think I'm done? You think that I'm done for that kind of an approach, or you think that kind of approach is all right?
No, I think that's maybe dangerous for new construction because you don't get to talk to the client. But I think that is a solid.
Maybe we should talk to the client. Maybe we got to give people operating manuals to say, hey, don't run the electric resistance heat. You don't need to.
Yeah, but no, this is a good, like, practical, most of the way electrification or heat pump approach in the colder climates that people have been doing in Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire, where they're just putting in one single split, ductless unit, high efficiency wall mount, and they're covering, 80, 90, maybe if the enclosure is good, maybe even 100% of the heating load. A lot of those houses, they're getting cooling for the very first time. So the homeowners are like, they don't care that the bedroom isn't perfectly cold. My homeowners would care because they're used to ducted central cooling systems. But those clients are like, wow, I've got cooling for the first time. This is great.
Ceiling fans. That's why I include ceiling fans as part of my specification. And why ceiling fans? Because they work to decrease the perception of temperature. So the actual thermostatic temperature may be higher in a room, but you can make people perceive it to be cooler. I understand you're not going to win with everybody. It also depends on where you are in the country. Here in Detroit, we have a little bit less extreme solar radiation beating in through windows. It really depends on your design. Brynn, I don't know. What do you think about a lightweight kind of, ductless, approach like that?
That works. John hit it on the head too. In situations where you don't get to talk to the customer, or if you're going to move, that's something to think about. But no, we've had to do unique solutions like that. Sometimes you walk into a lot of these properties and they've been modified, so you got what you got. So no, I think that was a pretty good approach.
It was an experiment, and it worked. Year one, it worked, and so I'm happy with it. What I guess we're saying is you got to think a little bit out of the box, practitioners. If you're doing any HVAC design work or even trying to move towards installations, you have to think about a balancing act in order to kind of deliver what the customer wants, but in the right package. I've seen people just totally overdo it. There was a house that I went for a HERS QA actually that was out by Kalamazoo, Michigan. So climate zone 5, it was on a lake. The contractor kind of was scared to put in heat pumps. And so he oversized them and had an individual head in every single room. And again, I was there doing QA while the home was already occupied. That doesn't always happen, but it was kind of very interesting because the customer was like, this is an almost passive house. And they were so proud of the design, but they were reporting that they were getting killed with energy bills and that they couldn't dehumidify the home properly. And I was like, I couldn't really tell. I was like, I'm not supposed to tell you what is wrong here, but your system's oversized, and you shouldn't have a head in every single bedroom. That wasn't a good idea, And so I don't know, folks. We got to keep working on it. Any final thoughts here, Brynn? What are you thinking? Anything else to take away for our listeners on getting electrification right?
Get it right. Start with the fundamentals: load count, duct design, equipment specification, and there's no room for all or nothing. We can still electrify and electrify slowly. So where it makes sense to do it fully 100%, go for it. Climates like Michigan, maybe dual fuel is what we roll with until we're able to get these houses weatherized. So that's my stance.
John, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think the transition is going to happen relatively slowly. The grids, for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, are going to be able to keep up. And the implementation is going to, the strategies are going to be regional. How you talk with the customers, how you approach it for their particular house, their situation, their budget, their comfort needs. You just have to, you have to tailor that approach. They need to be planned out. It's hard to electrify in a emergency change out situation. So get out in front of it, get your clients used to replacing stuff a little bit early. We didn't cover it at all today, but hot water is heat pump.
Well, I wasn't going to let you away with that. I want to know, because I'm due to put in a heat pump water heater in my house. I am ready to take advantage of the incentives through the Inflation Reduction Act to replace my atmospheric vented, 57% atmospheric vented water heater. But now I don't know if I should, because I got people like Nate Adams and even you, John, saying that you've had some failure issues with heat pump water heaters. So how do we get heat pump water heaters right? Is there a brand that we can at least encourage people to go for?
In my experience, not yet. The big three in the U.S., Rheem, Bradford White, A.O. Smith, our experience is poor. Our volume of installation is very small in terms of the current models for those. I have a Rheem, a fourth generation Rheem that is fantastic. All of our clients who had fourth generation Rheem units, they're doing great. The fifth generation units, the initial quality was poor. We switched over to A.O. Smith. The quality has been even worse. We have some customers who are on their third tank in 18 months. And so we had to stop. I mean, this is just a little side business for us. We're we're heating, cooling, ventilation contractor, not hot water installers. I don't know what's going on in the higher volume parts of the country, like California or Massachusetts, where they've got really big rebates and they're putting in thousands and thousands of these. Or like Clayton Homes is putting one in every single house this year, like 20,000 of them. I hope they've got it fixed. Nobody's reporting. I'm not hearing anything yet, like in terms of failures from other places. So I don't know if like Ohio and Indiana and Virginia just got a bunch of bad units over a period of 2 years from three different manufacturers. That seems unlikely, but yeah, so our experience is limited, but it's not good with the current crop. There's new products. There's a new product from LG, packaged water heater that looks promising. LG's got a good track record with like other packaged heat pump systems, like their heat pump clothes dryers, like things like refrigerators. They're pretty good at. So hopefully they're good at doing something similar, which is a heat pump water heater. It's not that different from those technologies.
Brynn, you got any thoughts on heat pump water heaters? You got any better thoughts? You deal with water heater replacement at all?
We're just now starting to get the demand for that. No problems as of yet, but we'll keep our eyes peeled. We're with the incentives and Inflation Reduction Act coming and the tax credits and stuff like that. We are starting to get a lot more customer requests, but no horror stories like John mentioned as of yet. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. We'll stay out of that lane.
Okay, well, good, because people are getting out there Rotten Tomatoes for and telling me that I was really quite regressive for keeping my atmospheric vented water heater at my house. And like, I agree, I want to get a heat pump water heater, but how can I rush out to go and get something like that when there's a fear that it's just going to turn into rubbish here very quickly? So, Natasha, final thoughts on getting electrification right?
I would say my biggest thing is that you got to get your envelope right, because I mean, you don't have to heat. If you can get your demand down, space that you don't have to heat, you can simplify your HVAC system, and then really you can get away with an electric baseboard. And I know a lot of people are like, electric baseboard, but they work and they're cheap. And I've dealt with properties where they've put heat pumps in and they've built very, very low energy homes like net zero and passive house buildings, and they put the heat pump in and they're not even using it because they don't need to, because they focused on the envelope and the air tightness. And I'm like, and it simplifies it for the occupant. I mean, we can talk about owners needing to have manuals on how to run the HVAC equipment in their home, and I'm like, no, just take the guesswork out of it for the customer. That's really the key to electrification, is making it simple for the consumer. Really is, like, as simple as you can make it and as best as you can design a system to go in so that the homeowner, whoever's occupying the space, doesn't even have to think about it. That's it. It's that simple.
Okay. Well, John and Brynn, it was really good to have you on the BERcast. I'm really excited that both of y'all are leading by example. You are out there doing the real work that we need to have done in order for us to learn these lessons and figure out how to make the adjustments so we can truly achieve these goals. So I appreciate you fellas coming on to the BERcast, and hopefully we'll have you on here again sometime.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for having us, man.